Hello there, comrades, and welcome to the Revolution Report. Today, as you can tell by the title, we're going to be talking about Dawn of the DINKs. For those of you who don't know what that means, it's dual income, no kids. It's a relatively small phenomenon, but one that's growing and is becoming more popular day by day in the current episode of Late Stage Capitalism. And I'm really happy to say that joining us for this discussion today is Alex from the Marx Engels Lenin Institute. Definitely check out his stuff if you haven't already. All the links are in the description. He's got a website, Telegram, Twitter, and of course a YouTube channel as well. He's talking about a lot of different, various, interesting topics with a Marxist-Leninist analysis. So once again, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to take a look in the chat just to make sure that if anything goes wrong with the live stream, that I'll be able to pick up on it, because I'm actually right now in St. Petersburg for work. The 80th anniversary of the breaking of the Leningrad blockade is going to be met with some big events here, so it's the day before that stuff is going to start. As you can see, I'm in a hotel room right now. But anyway, just to introduce the topic and why I think it was worth us having a live stream about, and why specifically I wanted to invite Alex on this program, is because this is an emerging phenomenon that can be actually analyzed in a number of ways. And the reason why it kind of caught a lot of our attention, specifically on the left, is because conservatives have been talking about it a lot, specifically Matt Walsh. And, you know, the general conservative line tends to be that we got to blame these people, you know, who are deciding not to have kids. You know, they're lazy. They're the moralistic mentality that we had back in the 1950s or whatever has broken down, and people are just, you know, not as decent as they used to be in previous years. This is obviously the summarizing of the general conservative line on this. Liberals obviously, for the most part, support it. It's an example of free choice and whatnot. But we as communists, we want to approach it from a standpoint of dialectical materialism, trying to understand the socioeconomic reasons for why people are making these choices in the first place. And just so you guys know, I think you should check out the article that also inspired this live stream. It's called Dawn of the DINKs. We reposted it on the Revolution Report. You can check it out on revolutionreport.org. But it was originally posted on the Class Consciousness Project, which is a really cool media outlet. They've got their own website. They're good comrades of ours, so definitely check out their stuff as well. So yeah, we're going to be basing a lot of the discussion off of what was written about in that article. And I guess where I'm going to springboard off to, before I'm going to hand it over to Alex here, is the main sort of general analysis in this article for why, or for the justifications that DINKs themselves have been saying for why they've chosen this lifestyle. And it happens mostly to be under two categories. One, for reasons of financial security. You know, people don't feel like having kids is a wise economic decision because, well, we can look at one statistic that the Brookings Institute made, that they said that to raise a child born in 2015 would cost $310,000 to raise them until they're 18 years old, which is, I think, a total underestimation. Doesn't take into account all of the things that aren't really immediately calculatable, like the fact that in the United States, for example, healthcare is not free, skyrocketing education costs, inflation, you know, it doesn't take any of that into account. So I think the real number would be a lot higher. And the second reason is one of consumerism, really. A lot of these DINKs that you can find on social media or that have been featured in the Western media talk a lot about how they can kind of live the good life, the bourgeois or petty bourgeois life that would be denied to them if they had kids. They can go golfing whenever they want, they can afford a lot of vacations, they can live as if, you know, they're in their early 20s for the rest of their lives. And also a myriad of other reasons, just like being able to not be woken up in the middle of the night by a screaming child and whatnot. But anyway, I'd like to open up the discussion now after that introduction, and we can have a sort of back and forth, Alex, about the way you see it as a Marxist, the way I see it as a Marxist, and then get into some of the details, how it's involved with the development of late-stage capitalism, immigration, all that stuff. So why don't you take over here?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Don. I first of all give credit where credit's due. The article was written by my comrade Jason from the Class Consciousness Project, so be sure to check out the website with that on it. There's a whole lot of other things on there, as Don said. Now, the question under discussion it's an interesting one, because I think that one of the reasons why I was happy to sit down and have this is because I think this is the kind of thing that Marxists, Leninists, communists, whatever we call ourselves, should be tackling these things head on. Because I think that the default position of the Western left in particular, particularly the Anglo-American left, has been to say, yes, and that's a good thing, about a whole range of things, including declining birth rates, the lack of ability of people to actually afford their own homes, the skyrocketing rates of addiction and other social ills, that really for a long time it was conservatives and sort of open reactionaries talking about it as, and then coming to the conclusion of, and this is because of a certain moral failing on behalf of individuals. And the left would say, no, it's all, either it's fine, it's good that everybody's high, it's good that everybody's not having children and the population's declining. Maybe it's good for climate change, so in terms of cutting it down. But the actual reality is that, as you indicate in your introduction, late-stage capitalism is doing things to working class and even petty bourgeois populations that can't be regarded as healthy, particularly if not, like us, you're serious about not just wanting to oppose capitalism, but see that capitalism is a tremendous waste of human potential, which it is. It's a gigantic waste of all of the economic potential that the system unlocked in its more progressive phase. And in its downslope, particularly in the imperialist countries, it's a waste of human potential in terms of people pursuing jobs that are useless and don't produce anything of any value, people leading lives that are wrapped up in a series of never-ending and profitable distractions, profitable for the ruling class, that is, lives without purpose, and that's just for the middle classes. When you get into the working class, you find everybody who is working class, you find that married couples, both of them have to work. The conservatives mourn the demise of the traditional, lunch pail wielding American worker of the 1950s, who could work in for instance, a Detroit car plant and raise 2 children, keep a household in a nice detached house in the suburbs somewhere, all on one wage. Now, I must say, of course, that was, I think, only ever a minority of the American working class actually had that, but it did exist for a time. And people mourn that and say, well, why can't it be like that anymore? And no one really wants to point to the fundamental problem. At root, it's that in both Britain and the United States, we've had 2 things going on. We've had the ruling class tell people since really the 60s that this system, comparing it to the communist states and the people's democracies that existed at the time, you are more individually free under this system. You are free to do anything you want. You can get high when you want. You can drink to excess when you want. There's no restrictions on your personal freedom here, unlike that ghastly regime that exists in the Soviet Union. And they had to take this line, I think, partly because they needed a way to ward off the appeal of socialism in the post-World War II era. And part of the reason they were able to do that was because of the consumer boom, the emergence of what some theorists have referred to as the culture industry. And so you were not, as if you're a worker in Britain or America, you in the 60s and 70s were not able to really control any aspects of your life. You had slightly more powerful trade unions then, it's true, but when it came to most of your life, you were sent where capital wanted you to be sent. But the reply of course, the ruling class was, but you've got all this leisure time, You can, to entertain yourself in a myriad of different ways. Whereas the Soviet worker, even in the period of what many of us refer to as the revisionist period, and perhaps you can speak more to this from your experience working in the post-Soviet spaces, Don, had more of a role, at least in before the later Brezhnev and Gorbachev eras, was able to play a role in production plans, was able to play a role in controlling certain aspects of his or her community that you never got to do here, even when the system was far more democratic. And I think this points us towards a big factor in the decline of the birth rate in the West, which was the ruling class moved in the direction of consumerism as an alternative to control over your life, over control over your workplace, control over your community. You could afford, back then at least, an infinite number of distractions, some of them quite pleasing: music, various pieces of cultural products, consumer goods, etc. You could shape your household, you could shape what your family wore, you could pretend in some ways that you were, or you had access to the lifestyle of the bourgeoisie themselves, which is what you get with all these, I know you get them in the States too, all these like makeover shows, make over your house, make over your life. And it's all sort of aping bourgeois styles, which is the message that they've had to give to people for years. The problem for the bourgeois is that in this particular phase of capitalism, they've had to restrict real wages in both the United States and Britain for longer than I've been alive, and I'm 42 now. So it's since about 1980, the average wage for workers in the United States and Britain has stayed still. And at the same time that, of course, you have the mass entry of women into the workplace as well. So this is an example of how everything under capitalism is a double-edged sword. The liberation of women that did take place in the 60s, 70s, 80s was unquestionably a good thing in terms of a civilizing influence. On the other hand, of course, when it's not coupled with a change to socialism, the capital wields the sword back at you again. It cuts one way, then it cuts the other, which is that now capital has another half of the population to send into the workplace to be exploited. So now we face a situation where it's been 40 plus years of stagnating wages, where if you are a married couple, both of you have to work just to keep your head above water if you've got children. At the same time, they've been telling successive generations, you can, and indeed must live like a bourgeois. You must spend your money whenever it comes in. You must have this holiday. You must have this piece of consumer goods. At the same time, of course, the Conservatives decry the decline of traditional religion in most communities, not all of them. And so really sort of consumerism, the culture industry, etc., has replaced organized religion for the capitalist class anyway. And so when you put all that together, I would argue that on the material and the sort of the cultural level, it's not a surprise that increasing numbers are now choosing to not have children, because A, they've been sold a lifestyle that they can only afford if they don't have them, and B, even if they wanted to, they actively get financially punished for actually having children, certainly in America and increasingly so in Britain. And if you look at the birth rates all the way across Western Europe and indeed into the East now as well, it bears that out. The evidence is right there in front of us. And the decline all starts in both the West and the East now in the period where capitalism has no challenger. When the Soviet Union is gone, when the working class bargaining power in the form of trade unions is decimated, you get the dip in the birth rate. And to go back to just finish this point on something I said earlier, you also have now in Britain at least, there's never been a period where capital's power to absolutely dominate every aspect of your life has been greater. Even going back 100 years, the worker organizations were stronger even in the 1920s when there was a lot of repression than they are now. So is it any wonder that people are not only in a mess in terms of financial woes and unable to have children, but also, to use a term that Marxists don't use, I think there is what you call a spiritual dimension, which is that there is not in terms of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost or anything like that, but in terms of the people feeling that the nation that they're in is going somewhere positive, that they have some stake in it, that they have some control over it, that they have some investment in it. Everybody might not know, but would be very well versed in Marxist analysis of why the situation is as it is, but they know they don't have any control over the country. They know it's hostage to, they feel that it's hostage to a tiny minority who are just driving it forward and often into a ditch. Put all that together, and I think that the birth rate question is explainable, and you don't have to resort to talking about moral failings or lack of Christianity anymore. It's just, this is the world that late stage capitalism has wrought, and many conservatives, including our old friend Mr. Shapiro and his mates, they all welcomed this for years. So, well, congratulations, guys. You got exactly what you asked for.
Yeah, exactly. You made a lot of interesting points there that I'd like to talk about. The fact that there's sort of three main things that you spoke about that I think are like three dimensions of the development of late-stage capitalism that we've seen. First of all, that you mentioned how Western capitalist societies have kind of tried to make a deal with the Western proletariat in terms of not allowing them to have real political and economic representation, they did in the Soviet Union to a higher degree, all things considered, by offsetting that with this sort of consumerism and this promise that you'd be able to chase the bourgeois or petty bourgeois style life. And we're seeing that in its extreme form right now, actually, and the reason and it's been accompanied by deeper exploitation of the working class, not only in the first world but also in the third world. Because if you read a lot of contemporary works like Imperialism in the 21st Century that Marxists have written about in terms of the hyper-exploitation of the third world, sort of part of this late-stage capitalist system of exploitation in the first world has to do also with a bit of bribery, because the actual exploitation that's going on around the world is much worse in the third world, in the sense that the imperialist countries are obviously pirating the resources and the labor of the third world and using it to sort of develop and continue this consumerism, this rampant consumerism in the first world, to sort of distract people from the fact that their lives are also getting more difficult. To say that, they live in the most prosperous countries in the world because they have all these things like cars and shiny new telephones and all this, even though, like you said, the real wages of people have been stagnant for years. The real quality of life has been going down. The growth rate is going down, is starting to decline. I mean, has been declining for a very long time as well, as a result of all this. And so all of this stuff kind of goes hand in hand. Whereas, like you said about the Soviet Union, there were a lot of things that, although the standard of living was a bit lower during the end of the revisionist period, there were a lot of things in the Soviet Union that actually would have been considered much more democratic than anything the United States has ever seen, for example. I mean, like, I've spoken with many people who used to live in the Soviet Union, since I'm in Russia right now, and I've been living for quite a while. And there's all these things that, like, we never hear about in the West, like the fact that there were tons of enterprises in the Soviet Union where they would be allotted a certain amount of funds in the economic plan for salaries, and the workers at the actual enterprises would determine themselves who was going to get how much money based on what the workers there had decided. So even in the revisionist period, where obviously the Soviet Union was not like an ideal Marxist utopia where the workers had direct ownership over everything that's going on in the country. Obviously, the Communist Party had to adapt to material conditions. They came up with the economic plans, but even they had participation with the people all over the country in forming those. But there's that. There's also the fact that there were unions all over the Soviet Union that made sure that people went on vacation. I mean, I've had so many people tell me that when they were living in the Soviet Union, union members would come to them and force them to go on vacation because they had been working for too long, and you could not say no, because there were actually laws that made it so that you had to take vacation after a certain amount of time. Childcare was seriously subsidized by the state. Food prices were seriously subsidized by the state so that they were not subject to inflation. These are things that don't exist in the West, and obviously make it very, very difficult for people to have families in the West. And so obviously if you think about individuals in the so-called developed Western world right now, and think about them on an individual basis, having the decision to either, have a family and have to deal with economic hardship, as well as obviously the physical hardship that comes with raising a family, because it's obviously physically tolling for the parents, no matter what system it's in, or living this bourgeois style, consumerist lifestyle, being able to live that lifestyle that's propagated all the time, especially in late stage capitalism now, where it's not only on the television, but it's all over social media, and everyone's posting pictures of how they're on these crazy expensive vacations in Dubai or whatever, and it's kind of like a consumer competition that's developed on social media. And that's also where a lot of these a lot of the videos and information about DINKs can be found. Actually, that's where it's kind of developed, as I believe.
Yeah, it's certainly social media acts as an accelerant, certainly in the West. I mean, I think there was an interesting comparison between what goes on Chinese TikTok and what goes on American TikTok. And Chinese TikTok, it's like young people doing science experiments. And American TikTok, it's like some guy shooting somebody else, or like somebody filming somebody on a fentanyl overdose, or things even more extreme than that. But I think that this is a case of where the ruling class's plans, as they always do, cycle back around and come back to bite them, essentially. Like now, we're faced with a situation where they're actually starting to worry that there's not going to be enough men to fill the ranks of the armed forces in future years. I mean, I was interviewing somebody today about DPRK, and part of the research for that, I looked at what the birth rate was for South Korea, which of course is occupied and controlled by the US. It's less than one child per woman now. It's like 0.9. Yeah. So it's literally a society which is dying out, and you dive into it, and because this is an interesting case to look at due to the extreme amount of US direct control over South Korea. And you see that like it's created like a sort of nightmarish thing where like the working day is now 21.5 hours long. And that's basically so people in low paid jobs can take like 3-4 jobs per day for like 6 hours here, 2 hours here, 3 hours there. It's where they want to go here ultimately, which is basically complete casualization of the workforce. And then you get on top of that a nightmarish culture dominated by an extremely bizarre attitude towards sex and sexuality, which is treated as a sort of in a hyper commodified way. You get like bizarre like addictions to pornography and various different substances as well. And that's all basically capitalism promoting all of that to make sure that this hyper exploited labor force doesn't draw radical conclusions. I think it's quite deliberate. Not only is it profitable, but it puts up a load of barriers between the worker and the attaining of a higher degree of class consciousness. And I think that's why, when we're talking about South Korea there, it's also why I think that the American state and the British state are quite happy with, for instance, drug and alcohol consumption being the way that it is, so that all these extremely alienated, particularly like younger men and women, can find infinite ways to distract themselves. And that's what British capitalism is capable of providing you with now. It's not capable of providing you with a solid and decent education anymore, not really. The education standards have gone down as the number of qualifications attained has gone up. And they certainly don't want to teach younger people how to actually critically engage and analyze the world, or like just simply for all the lectures they give from time to time on decency and good behavior. They don't really want to push that, because part of this deal, as we've been saying, is, well, you get to basically do whatever you want outside the workplace. Inside the workplace, we want you there making money for us, but outside of it, you are a king in your own mind,
Yeah.
And this is now having another impact, is this sort of It is social disintegration, essentially, that is being carried out. And now the British ruling class are panicking because they've suddenly realized that, oh shit, this might mean that people might not respond to being drafted into the army, you know? So now, due to the fact that their proxy war in Ukraine, which I know you've been on the ground covering that, is clearly going disastrously wrong, they're now starting to panic about the future, which I think that they're telling a lot of lies about that, but they're trying to sort of scare people into continuing to politically back more funds for what might soon be the Lvov regime by saying, oh, well, we might have to call you up. We might have to stick you in the army. If you're over 40 or 50, we might have to put you in some sort of National Guard as well. So you can see that the way that the more reactionary of them are going to this declining birth rate and social disintegration question in Britain, certainly, I think this is probably true with certain elements in the more reactionary intellectual circles in America too, is that they want to go towards what I would call a more traditional fascist model. And that's going to be their solution. You see this with various sort of online influencer types on the right in Britain, like New Culture Foundation, people like that. Their solution to it all is basically put a flag in every school, bring back beating children to make sure they're instilled with discipline, do heavily repress trade unions, that's their number one priority, and also then bring in like militarization of society to essentially, whilst talking constantly about freedom. And that's the solution of the more, what I would say, the more conscious end of the bourgeoisie who at least has identified that there's a problem for them. But this is one of my fears, is that if we as a movement need to urgently get ourselves organized, because at the moment the reactionaries are the only ones posing the question. Like the broad left is not. It's got its head in the sand, frantically trying to pretend that nothing's wrong. So this is a danger that I would highlight for us.
Yeah, I have to agree, definitely. And I wanted to talk a bit at length about one of the things you mentioned in connection to this DINKs question, which is, of course, the declining birth rate. Because Russia, for example, is also suffering from a declining birth rate. But it's important to understand the difference in reason for why we're seeing declining birth rates in the West and a declining birth rate in Russia. Because Russia has been struggling with this since the fall of the Soviet Union, actually. And this has been a problem ever since then because of the consequences from that horrible event that took place. But and obviously we've spoken about the fact that we see the causes for the declining birth rate in the West to be specifically connected to the imperialist model of exploitation. But the reason why there's this difference, I mean, the way we can understand this difference in cause is also by how both societies deal with it, right? Because the Russian government has actually taken a lot of measures to combat this, that we have not even seen anything similar in the West. Like, for example, in Russia, if you have a family with 3 or more children, your entire family gets free access to all cultural institutions in the country. So, like museums, government organized events, anything, concerts. You all get also public transport, if I'm not mistaken. Everyone in that family gets free access to that for life, basically. This is stuff that's otherwise only available to pensioners. Another thing is that for every child you have in Russia, the government gives you just a lump sum of money. And the more kids you have, the bigger that sum of money is. So the government does... That's not even all as well. They also... if you have over 3 children, you get special benefits to super low interest rates on mortgages, so you can afford a house to put your family in. And there are so many benefits that I don't know all of them myself, so I'm sure there's a lot more. But obviously the Russian government is really trying to fix this problem and sort of stimulate the population growth rate. And we're not seeing any of that in the West, even though prices are much higher in the West. Also, in at least the United States, there's obviously no free healthcare, no free education, and those costs just continue to rise. Like in the United States, I mean, we have the most expensive healthcare in the world, and it's of lesser quality than most of Europe. And even in places in Europe where they have universal healthcare, the taxation connected to that is absolutely crippling on working class people. Like the first thing that comes to mind for me is Germany. I have friends in Germany who say, yeah, like everyone there has healthcare, but you pay, so much through taxes that are mandated by the government for you to have that healthcare. I don't know how it is in the UK, but I mean, a lot of my British friends just say that the system is crumbling, there's not enough staffing and all that. So there's tons of problems in that regard as well. But you almost never, especially now these days, you almost never hear politicians talking about ways to encourage people to have healthy, functioning families. If anyone's addressing the problem, it's attacking the people who are saying they don't want to have families. Like we were talking about. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, no party in the country, in Britain, will actually put forward something that would in any way make the lives of working parents easier. And it's very rare that there's a stay-at-home mother or father these days, because everybody has to work. And that would be like the provision of daycare services. There used to be some kind of national system for this that was closed down all the way across the country about 10 years ago, and the only thing that's replaced it has been private nurseries, which cost a bomb and which most parents can't afford. Yeah. So on that most basic of levels, the system tells, or basically doesn't even tell you, it just is the fact that if you're a couple, you will both have to work to afford to make the payments either on your rent or your mortgage, and everything else that you've clocked up in debt as well as your living costs. And on top of that, then if you've got a child between the ages of 1 and 4, well, you'll need to basically hope that your family can look after them, or that you can find the money to pay for childcare for them, because the state's giving you nothing. And occasionally a Labour Party politician will come out and say, well, maybe we should do something about this. And then they don't. Because that would involve it would involve not only spending money, it would involve investing and planning something out and actually delivering a project on a specified timescale, which none of the British machinery of the state is interested in doing. It's basically the British state is just involved in the process of sending money from the Treasury into the private sector, largely into the banking sector, and that's about it. And the health service, it's still there and free at the point of delivery, but it is being starved of funds and slowly converted to an American system, bit by bit by bit. They can't do it all at once because they would face a gigantic political revolt, but their plan has been for 30 years now to bring in more and more elements of the system from the United States so that the cost goes up and the quality level goes down. Yeah. And then when you've got people at the point where they're so pissed off due to the rationing of of healthcare, then you say, well, can't afford it anymore, we better privatize it. And you hope that you've softened up opinion enough by then. So again, the British ruling class just show no interest in solving any of these problems. There's a minority of them, like the ultra-reactionary types, who are interested, but the bulk of them, because the British ruling class are just interested in keeping their capital flowing, they're just interested in making sure that their place within the imperialist system, of which they are one crucial element in the form of the City of London, and this system is protected overall by US imperialism. As long as their place within that is safe, they don't care. The country can fall apart, society can fracture, all of that can occur, but as long as their place within the system is fine, they don't care. It's why I think Marxists should make the point more strongly that not only is imperialism the ruin of many countries across the world, which you were pointing out earlier, are subject to hyper-exploitation and or wars of imperialism, it ultimately destroys the home country, which is what's happening here and in the US right now, I think.
Yeah, and this is only sort of one aspect also of another thing that conservatives properly identify but misdiagnose, of course, but that's the sort of disintegration of the family structure. which I think is still really important for communists to look at, communist, socialists, leftists, whatever, because if you look at all the historical, well, you could go all the way back to Aristotle, right? Like Aristotelian philosophy, I mean, never looked at really an individual on an individual level. Like the smallest unit was considered to be a family unit because a person was not born into a forest. They were born into a family. And when we look at the worker struggles that have taken place throughout the 19th century, 20th century, the union struggles, we can't even look at it. And this is even back when families were supported typically by one male breadwinner. We can't even look at it as a struggle of just working men. All of their families were all involved in the working class struggle against the bosses. And it was necessary that way because the working man needed his family behind him to help fight that struggle, to help survive also, through being hyper exploited. Specifically, I'm thinking about like mining communities where some of the fiercest working class struggles took place in the 20th century. These were all unions that essentially were not only consisting of the working men but also their families. So when we talk about like the disintegration of family structure in a society, it's not good for the progression of society. I mean, it's actually part of something that a number of people have talked about, specifically towards the end of the Soviet Union, like Gennady Zyuganov, even Alexander Dugin, who's not a communist, but the atomization of society, the fact that capitalism has an atomizing effect on society. And I think this is, the disintegration of the family as we know it in the 21st century is a key part in that. Because the smaller, the more atomized people become and separate away from each other, whether it be in the workplace, where we see the gig economy desocializing the means of production, whether it be people not having, strong, healthy families, it causes people to be divided. And the whole point, the whole way that socialists or the working movement is going to have any success is through organization. And the basic molecule of that is the family, I think.
Yeah, the charge from the reactionaries is often, Marxists want to abolish the family. Of course, quoting a line from Engels without inserting the true nature of that line, which is the bourgeois version of the family.
Right.
Like, there's plenty of examples in actually existing socialism, as you were talking about earlier, Don, which is that family life actually became stronger in the Soviet Union, in People's Republic of China, Vietnam, DPRK, places like that, where you not only get larger families that are more committed to each other, but also the disintegrating elements are, even where in areas where capitalist production has continued to a degree, the disintegrating elements are at least mitigated there, and there is a push in the other direction. Yeah. Here, you get, the sheer hypocrisy, I shouldn't be surprised at it, of like conservative politicians. You got the famous quote from Margaret Thatcher saying that there is no such thing as society, only individuals and their families. Well, the families bit of that didn't last too long. Mm-hmm. When you put people under relentless pressure and actively punish them for having children, and then adopt this very moralizing attitude towards anybody who has a lot of children, they're actually looked down upon in this culture, including by the very people who sort of decry the decline of the family. Especially if they're people who are unemployed for long periods. Oh, look at this. It used to be a big thing like 15 years ago, where the tabloid press would go out and find some guy who was on welfare and had like 6 kids, and then they put him on the front page saying, "You're feeding his children," to the newspaper's audience of scared petty bourgeois people. And it's that kind of thing. You see, the ruling class culture, because it's so dedicated to creating as many divisions as possible, and created to within the working class, that is, it tries to foster the most sort of extreme, even like anti family attitudes, whilst at the same time preaching about family, faith, and all that when it's Christmas holidays and stuff like that, or when they need a good headline. So again, this is capitalism caught in its own trap. It needs hyper-individualization. It needs atomization of the workforce. It needs everybody to be available for exploitation. But it also needs a new generation of workers, because without the labor of workers, there is no profit. But without children, there's no new generation. And so this then throws open the other questions, such as the immigration question and other factors that get thrown around as debating points but never actually analyzed, which is that you have all this controversy between the state of Texas and the federal American government right now about the border. I mean, the reason why so many people come into both Britain and the United States is because the capitalists have a labor demand there for hyper-exploitable labor, which the domestic working class can no longer meet. And that, as with the birth rate question being as severe as it is, that problem is only going to get worse. And so therefore, the response to the capitalist class is going to be, well, we need to bring more people in again. And then you get back to, working class and middle class discontent over immigration. Politicians try to exploit it. Situation gets worse. Whichever way you turn on this question of the birth rate question of like the societal disintegration, it all comes back to the activities of the ruling class, the natural results of decaying capitalism, and that they don't have solutions, any of them. Like it's just like literally more of the same and to try and buy themselves time. That's it.
Right, yeah. I mean, and the immigration question, this is something I forgot to mention as well. Like, the sort of advantage that or if you want to call it an advantage, that the imperialist world has in sort of offsetting the consequences of the declining birth rate, of course, is connected to the fact that it super exploits the third world. It creates a horrible situation, a horrible economic situation in the third world, in the developing world, so that people want to leave. And when they come to the first world, they can offset the potential labor shortages that are, of course, problematic in connection to the declining birth rate. And this is obviously the cycle of exploitation that, unfortunately, late-stage capitalism has created. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about something I forgot to mention also when we were talking about the USSR, right? You mentioned that a sort of... Right, as women became integrated into the workforce in the West, what went hand in hand was obviously deeper exploitation of the working class, because the capitalists then saw, oh, okay, women can be in the workplace as well. We can make it so that working families require 2 breadwinners instead of just 1. And of course, like the integration of women into the workplace is like you said, good. It's a positive thing. But unfortunately, with capitalism, that goes hand in hand with it. But in the Soviet Union, when socialism was established, women were also integrated into the workforce. But that was accompanied by a lot of different things that were, a lot of different government programs that were made to offset the potential problems that could go with that, right? So cafeterias were established all across the Soviet Union, which, they're like workers' canteens where workers could go there and they wouldn't have to spend so much time cooking at home. Domestic toil, they used to call in the Soviet Union. They had affordable food that you could get quickly at canteens that were all over the place, and they even had them at workplaces, And this is actually really common in Russia still. This is a sort of unique cultural aspect of Russia that comes from the Soviet Union, where they have cafeterias all over the place, where it's not a restaurant. You go there, you get food quick. It's cheap, but it's good quality, and that way you don't have to. A woman's not going to be confined to the house having to cook for everyone, as is the case in traditional capitalist family structure, right? And there was also childcare given for children in the Soviet Union as well. And again, this is affordable childcare is actually pretty common in Russia today, as a sort of offshoot of the Soviet legacy as well. And also, what you said about the family, I also, this is something I was discussing with comrades this week actually. This is a very important difference, the difference between abolishing the bourgeois family and the proletarian family, right? because a lot of liberals make the mistake of thinking that the family is a patriarchal structure in itself, that it's an oppressive patriarchal structure. But I feel like this is a misunderstanding, because obviously when the family as we know it was emerged in slave society, I mean, I remember learning in university that the Latin translation of family actually specifically meant a unit of slaves under the command of a landowning man. And that was the case back before slaves could have families, right? But with the development of society, right, the family was extended to proletarian to the proletarian class, and this sort of I guess you could say modern slave relationship, or looking at or commoditizing women or commodifying women in the marriage is characteristic of bourgeois families, which Karl Marx writes about in the Communist Manifesto. Even he doesn't call for the abolishing of proletarian families, but of the bourgeois family for precisely that reason. So,
yeah, I mean, the mistake is to assume, as what you might call the sort of liberal leftists do, sort of pseudo-anarchist types do, that the family is a fixed and unchanging thing.
Right.
You know, they're all and this is when you get into the debates with sort of anarchists and liberal types who you will say things like, the family is bad, or authority is bad, or states are bad. And it's, in my view, it's a very underdeveloped and, to be honest, a little bit of a childish way of viewing things, which is that you have to investigate the material basis to start an inquiry on into the nature of something. So, like, the material basis for the proletarian family of the future, and indeed of the Soviet past, in your part of the world, shows you that things can be markedly different in terms of you remove the property transaction element from marriage, which is what the bourgeois family is in many ways based on. You know, women are used to basically do land deals back in the feudal period between different aristocrats. That carries over into property deals and inheritance in the bourgeois period. But the socialist societies that have existed until very recently show us different ways of doing things, some of which you've mentioned in relation to the Soviet Union. Even liberals will admit that the German Democratic Republic, the old DDR, had an unrivaled system of childcare provision that was run collectively, often on the basis of neighborhoods and workplaces providing it, that enabled women to go back to work very quickly after they'd had a child, and also that there was a level of trust inside communities. Certainly in the DDR, I think this is true across the socialist world, that doesn't exist in capitalism. Because if you examine the nature of crimes and criminality in the GDR or other socialist countries, the level of just plain antisocial, psychotic and violent behavior towards children or towards anybody was significantly less, to the point where it barely existed in many of these places. Here, sociopathic and psychopathic behavior and extremely violent behavior is encouraged by the system. You can't even argue that it's not anymore by making a direct comparison in terms of where capitalism has been restored through the counter-revolutions of 1989. You look at the social problems in Germany now, in Eastern Germany, where capitalism was restored, the kind of life it offers for younger children, the kind of life it offers for families, the criminal behavior that has grown as a result of the social ills of capitalism in the Federal Republic that we've been talking about as common to late-stage capitalism. The connection between capitalism and not just a sort of petty crime, but extremely violent crimes, extremely antisocial crimes, crimes that make people that are then exploited by the ruling class to create more fear, but the connection between this system and individual criminal behavior is it's undeniable now, just by making that comparison in the places where capitalism has been restored. And you can compare, like, the life in the GDR, even in the period that was regarded as difficult in the 80s, and the life of people in Germany now, and it's night and day. So again, it comes back to a whole society question. The family that both conservatives and liberals want to talk about. They always talk about it as if it's just this thing that is isolated from both the relations of production and the societal relations that the mode of production creates. Whereas in actual fact that we know, and I hope we've demonstrated in the discussion we've been having, that not only can you not separate the family from the mode of production, but the mode of production creates, as we go forward, hopefully into a socialist system, will create a family system which is free of exploitation. And that will enable people not just to have more children, but to want to have more. Because, again, they will be part of a community which they feel that they can not only trust, but that they embrace, as it is something which they control, which is something that they shape by their labor and their social activity. And that is just an immeasurably healthier system to have children within.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Alex. I think I'm going to have to cut the live stream now, though, because it looks like we're having some internet problems and it keeps cutting in and out. But I think we had quite a good discussion, and that kind of covered the topic that we wanted to discuss, the DINKs, the population degrowth, and its causes. But yeah, it's always a pleasure having you on, Alex, and we'll of course have many more discussions, deep discussions about topics like these that the left has to talk more about. I think it happens to be that a lot of the topics that these conservatives bring up are really good topics for us to be discussing, just from a completely different angle, because. Yeah, it just so happens, I guess, but I kind of rarely find that liberals bring up good things to talk about. I don't know why.
Well, don't forget he was interested in debating gender politics in Marvel movies.
Yeah, and that kind of stuff, there's really no good angle to take in terms of analysis. But again, Alex, thanks a lot for coming on the Revolution Report. Everyone watching, definitely, again, check out the Marx Engels Lenin Institute. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, all of the links are in the description. He's got his own website, Telegram, Twitter, YouTube, a lot of good stuff. So definitely check that out. And also, in terms of the Revolution Report, we have opened our marketplace on our website. So make sure to check that out as well. We're still developing it. You can find some t-shirts and mugs and stuff like that with the Revolution Report logo on it. If you want to help us out and not only make a donation, but also, get a t-shirt as well with our logo, that would help us out a lot. So thanks again for joining us, comrades. Check out the marketplace and the website and all of our different social media links that you can also find in the description. And Workers of the World Unite. All right, sweet.